Death is the one certainty of life, yet I found myself in an environment, in a culture where people were avoiding talking about death, a death denial culture, especially where children and young people were concerned. The Grim Reaper holds no bounds. So let's talk about death. Once upon a time, a miracle child was born to parents, King Leon and Queen Betty. There were great celebrations in the land. Betty was a bridal dressmaker and enjoyed sewing beautiful clothes for her little infant daughter. King Leon was overjoyed and played endlessly with the daughter he thought he'd never have. But they were not to live happily ever after. In fact, not to live at all. But this isn't where the story ends. You might recognise this little girl in the blue satin dress. Yes, it's me. I'm on my way to my 4th birthday party, and I didn't really understand the excitement around this birthday party. What I didn't know, and what all the adults around me didn't know, was that my mother was never going to make my wedding dress. In fact, she didn't make my 5th birthday party. She died of breast cancer shortly after this photograph was taken. I lived with my dad as a single parent until 5 years later, after one night's bedtime cuddle, he dropped dead of a heart attack. My world changed that moment. My childhood was lost. My whole world was blown apart, and life as I knew it changed, and not for the good. I not only lost my parents, I lost my school, my home, my identity. I lived every child's worst possible nightmare, that I was no longer protected, guided and loved by the very people I was born to. And there were certainly words that no child ever wants to hear. I was surrounded by a conspiracy of silence. Children quickly understand the discomforts that adults have about talking about death or dying, and it's very easy to fool adults and into a quick recovery. Adults are so enticed by the myth of closure. Children's pain is very hard to bear. It's very hard to express, and it's very hard to understand. After all, they are words that no one wants to hear. So I kept my story silent for 30 years. I felt alone. I lived in absolute abject terror and fear, and I was very close to the edge. And I want to change that story for other bereaved children today, before I die, because otherwise we take our difficulties into adulthood. So let's talk about death. But we don't want pity, and we don't want the sorry. What we do want is the empathy. So come on my journey. How do you talk about something that no one really wants to talk about, let alone think about or do anything about, except for sweep the issue under grief's carpet? Would you leave a child with a broken leg lying in the street? Of course not. So why are we leaving and overlooking children with broken hearts? People think it's different today. It is slightly, but not really. The words to the unspeakable are laced with assumptions. For example, children don't grieve, children are resilient, children bounce back, the children are fine. With part knowledge, I don't know what to say, so I don't say anything at all. If we avoid it, it will go away. There's value judgments. For example, time heals. It does, but It's no good going back, that's opening old wounds. Children and young people who are bereaved have scars, have wounds. And also their own fear, talking about death, will damage children. They're already damaged or re-traumatise the children. So why put words to the unspeakable? What can go wrong? I meet people all the time who've got thoughts of suicide. Death holds that attraction that you'll meet and see that person again. And that's the one thing you really wish for more than anything. Depression. Research has shown us that we will die younger. There's a high incidence of youth offenders who have been bereaved as young people. You live in fear at ends of the extreme. Death blows your world apart, leaving you with very basic existential questions that no children should be left with, or young people. Questions such as, gone where? What's forever? For how long? Why can't God bring them back? If God takes the good, why don't they take me? How can I just behave like everything's normal? If time's a healer, why do I miss them more as time passes, not less? As Shakespeare's Hamlet tells us, to be or not to be. Even his mother puts on his inky cloak so he can hide his true feelings from the rest of the world. Existential questions I didn't even know how to ask, like why do bad things happen to good people? We need to allow children to go deeper, to help to understand the trauma and the subsequent cognitive processes where we can add words and thoughts to the unthinkable. So what? J.K. Rowling was inspired to write Harry Potter because her mum died. I was inspired to write a book because my mum and my dad died. And that book was about putting thoughts to the unthinkable, to encourage conversations between children and adults about death. I had no idea about the public impact that book would have, and it propelled me and changed my life overnight. The book became a bestseller. It was based on my own experience as a psychotherapist, my own experience, and the experience of the children and bereaved I was meeting. And that book holds very powerful messages. The powerful messages were to challenge the theories of grief that I'd been brought up with and that I'd learned, like the stages of grief or tasks of grief. Grief isn't like that. It's not nice and neat. It's laced with confusions. And it starts with a trauma, that black hole in the middle. It starts there, which I kind of call phase 1. But it's about where children, young people, split their thoughts, behaviours and feelings. Quite often, widows were saying to me 6 months on, I feel worse now, and I'd say, good, because this is now the time you're allowed to feel. Yet everyone was burdened by this theory of having to accept what had happened. Why should you ever accept what this kind of tragedy, this kind of trauma? So we replace the word adjustment and give people time. We use very odd measures of grief. We need to rethink why we use time. You can't measure grief with a ruler. Why are we measuring it in days or weeks? People need permission to grieve, and also to replace that word, adjustment. The warning signs for us are stuckness, not feeling. We need a much more emotionally focused approach. And it's not a process of letting go of the loved one, as Freud's writings have led us to believe. It's much more about making remembrances, about filling the voids, and about rebuilding or helping children rebuild their lives. So can I take a moment to encourage you to think about your own loss? And at this point, I guess I might divide the room into those that understand bereavement and have been bereaved and those that don't. But still take a moment to think about your own personal experience. What happened in the first few days? What happened in the first few months? Bereaved people continually tell me that they're expected to get on with it, to get over it, and to be normal. Normal no longer exists. I was in a fortunate position that I could action what felt like the impossible and set up and run a grief encounter, which is an organisation which helps bereaved children and families. And how do we help them? It's based on the book that I wrote, and it's lots of creative activities. It might be some one-to-one space, some one-to-one counselling, where children and people can reflect on what's happened and to tell their story from their point of view. That was something I was never given a chance to do. And it might be about getting people together, because that's a very empathic, safe space in our grief workshops or in our family days, our remembrance days, or it might be at camp where we take people away in a safe, relaxed residential environment. And then we bring that together in training courses for professionals. It's an accredited university training program where we can share the expertise we've learnt from our bereaved children and families, where we encourage children to play and have fun, because that's what's gone out of their lives. If we're propelled back to infanthood, we focus on our basic survival needs and we lose that creativity. We use humour as well. We have fun too. As Jimmy Carr tells us, if you are close to someone who's died, move chairs. So we need to recognise that grief takes someone into a completely new world with a new language. We need to give people that language. It needs to be a multidisciplinary effort. We're all involved in it. We need to acknowledge the devastation, which includes awareness about the other losses involved. Change our listening by going deeper. Give children the language and help them to process it over time. Remembrances, not letting go. There's something in this for the non-bereaved too. What us as bereaved can teach the non-bereaved is that our time on earth is so limited. It can so easily be taken away. And how important it is to value the day and what we value in life. That's the positive, that's the hope. If we can truly face and accept that one certainty in life, talk about death, and the paradoxical thought that death is part of life, we can find a route to a happier, better life. Happily ever after. And what did happen to that orphan princess? She was adopted by her family in the country without a wicked stepmother. She lived and played happily and grew into a confident, kind, and much-loved lady until she was swept off her feet by her Prince Charming. They married and lived happily ever after with their 4 beautiful children, surrounded by family, friends, laughter and love. She was intent on turning bad into good and not being a victim, so she set up a place of healing, a safe place for other children and young people who had suffered the loss of a parent or a sibling. So thank you. Thank you, TEDxWarwick, for giving me this platform, and thank you for listening and helping me add words to the unspeakable, thoughts to the unthinkable, and action to the impossible. Together, by talking about death, we can change the happily never after into happy ever after. Thank you.